Good morning, and I'm honoured to co-launch with the Taoiseach Ireland's National Action Plan for implementation of UN Security Council Resolution 1325. It's great that you've come yourself, Taoiseach, to launch it, and looking at you, I can't resist saying, you know, blessed art thou amongst women. But I'd like to begin with something that you touched on in your own remarks, and that is the fact that, as we know, gender-based violence is still a terrible problem. And I have haunting images from the recent visit to Somalia with Concern Worldwide, Trócaire and Oxfam Ireland. It was a case of going back after 19 years and finding that the situation was worse. First of all, when we went in October 1992, it was October, and therefore the rainy season would be coming very shortly. And it was the dry season and the action of warlords that had caused the acute crisis and famine at that time. It was possible to talk to the warlords and to try to reason with them, but you can't talk to Al-Shabaab because they are vicious and very dangerous to their own people and to others. And there was another element that really struck me, that the Horn of Africa has had the 8 hottest years in succession ever. But both in Somalia and in particular crossing the border into Kenya to try to get to the Dadaab camp, which we visited the next day, those families and those women and their families who had already been traumatized by the long journey they'd made to get to the border were so often attacked going across the border. It was the topic of conversation everywhere. I was told about women arriving in the Dadaab camp naked because everything had been taken from them. And the trauma on top of having lost children or a husband on the journey anyway. And so there's a very real need for us in that acute situation, but just generally, to continue to focus on this issue. So that's why the launch today of the National Action Plan and the meeting of the Consortium is so important. Getting to this point with the National Action Plan has been somewhat of a long journey in itself, and as you know, at times it has been a rocky journey. T.S. Eliot wrote that it's the journey, not the arrival, that matters. I agree that journeys are important, but I think that it's also important to arrive, as we have done today. Like the Taoiseach, I want to pay warm tribute to those involved in producing the National Action Plan. The consultative group, which brought a wide range of civil society representatives together, did a really very good job. And I think it was important that an independent and wise chair and bossy chair, INEZ McCormack, was brought in. I'd also like to pay tribute to Nata Duvuri of NUI Galway, sitting modestly at the back, and indeed to join with Shirley, who did so much external outreach, and Niamh Riley, who chaired the technical group. All of these played a really important role, as did the officials in the different departments in Foreign Affairs, Justice and Equality, Defence, Education and Skills. They also deserve credit for the work they put into this, as do the Defence Forces and An Garda Síochána. And I'd like to pay tribute to the Joint Consortium on Gender-Based Violence, which held its annual meeting earlier this morning under the able chairmanship of Angela O'Neill. I've often praised this novel structure of the consortium and the fact that it brings together NGOs, officials from key departments, from the Irish Aid, as well as the Defence Forces, and at times the Garda Síochána. It is an innovative format. It's in its 7th year, and it has committed now to a further 3 years with a new action plan, a new thinking strategic plan. The consortium has played an important role in bringing gender-based violence much higher up the agenda of both the official agenda and also of non-governmental organisations. A valuable aspect is that it monitors what the key players are doing to combat gender-based violence. And I've made a point each year to push a little bit those who come to account for their record. I note that the evaluation that was made of the consortium, which was recently carried out, concluded that its approach is, and I quote, very strategic, comprehensive and ambitious. And the evaluation makes a number of recommendations which I'm sure will be considered. So it's good to have a national action plan on Resolution 1325 with a range of practical recommendations. The NAP is the product of an effective multi-part methodology for which Ireland should be commended, and in particular the spirit and elements of which should be continued in the NAP implementation phase. This launch is the beginning of another process, the process of implementation. So let me identify some of these elements. First of all, Security Council Resolution 1325 and the related commitments on women, peace and security have been recognised as a priority across a number of departments and agencies under the auspices of the Department of Foreign Affairs. Secondly, an effective independently chaired consultative group comprising governmental representatives and a range of representatives from civil society organisations and academia have contributed. Thirdly, a high level of active participation and contributions from civil society organisations and individuals with expertise on issues of women, peace and security were invoked. Fourthly, a vital series of consultations and workshops with women affected by conflict who are currently living in Ireland, including migrant women and women who have experienced conflict in Northern Ireland, were brought in. Fifthly, an independent expert was engaged to produce a complete draft national action plan that integrated the inputs of government departments and agencies, civil society and academic members of the consultative group, and the report of consultations with women affected by conflict. Sixthly, a NAP format informed by best practice internationally and structured around concrete and feasible actions, along with SMART, S-M-A-R-T, SMART indicators, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant and timed in 5 key pillars: prevention, protection, participation, relief, recovery and rehabilitation, and promotion of 1325+. So I want to just talk about a couple of innovative aspects of this national action plan. First of all, the support for piloting of surveys on how women in local communities perceive their levels of security in conflict-affected settings where Irish peacekeepers are stationed. This consulting with local women is extraordinarily important. It was one of the issues that came out when we marked the 10th anniversary of 1325, that women themselves are not brought into the picture. Women are not consulted. Their views don't seem to be important or relevant, and yet they're the experts. They know what the situation is. So I think that that's very welcome. The commitment to support documentation of the experiences and needs of migrant women living here in Ireland who have experienced conflict. And I think that the Irish National Action Plan is particularly innovative in recognising that donor countries such as Ireland have a duty of care to women affected by conflict living in their jurisdiction, living here, and not only to women in conflict situations in other parts of the world. I haven't heard about other national action plans of donor countries that have been as inclusive, and I think this is very welcome. Thirdly, support for exchange and cross-learning among women's civil society organisations in Ireland within and across the North and South, and that came up in our discussion earlier in a very appropriate question. It would be interesting to see if Northern Ireland were to develop a national action plan that could intensify that kind of cross-referencing. Well, Northern Ireland can give a lead. You know. On the monitoring and evaluation of the National Action Plan, I believe that there needs to be a quick move to specify procedures and timelines for selection of the independent chair and members of the monitoring group, and dates of first meetings. And the plan, I have to point out, is 2011 to 2014. There's not much left of 2011, so we have to really begin with a bang in order to justify that these are this is the span of the National Action Plan. And I'm sure that the Joint Consortium, which is taking on the monitoring and evaluation of the implementation of the NAP as one of its strategic priorities, I'm sure it will move on that. It's not for me to dwell at any length on the question of adequate resources, but of course, in order for the plan to be implemented, that will also be needed. And it would be important, I think, to schedule meetings without delay. As a matter of urgency, the first meeting of the monitoring framework in the NAP, this should be taken as a point of departure for the new monitoring and evaluation process, and the indicators need to be looked at. And all of this is, I think, what we will be looking at in the joint consortium next year. We will be evaluating the steps that have been taken. Could I just mention one step, because we have discussed in the private session this morning the value of having the Gardaí and the Defence Forces, particularly the Defence Forces, as formal members of the joint consortium. But if you look at the figures, women still account for only 6% of those engaged in overseas missions of the Defence Forces. The figure for the Garda missions is 18%. So clearly there's quite a long way to go to bring about gender equality, or certainly a better gender balance. And so I think it will be important to look at how to implement in practice. But that being said, I'm really very proud of the fact that we have a good, innovative national plan of action that has been really the result of a true partnership at the end between all the elements, many of them represented here. And I have spoken many times in international settings about the innovative joint consortium on gender-based violence. I will now add to that the fact that we have this innovative national action plan, but it's all in the implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just before I introduce Susan, I'd like to thank Mary, but something else was said in the private session this morning that she alluded to. In 3 years' time, it will be the 10th anniversary of the consortium. I don't think any of us who were there in the first year thought there would be, that was where we're going, but that's where it will be. And in 3 years' time, it will be the 3 years of the National Action Plan. And frankly, the focus is, by that time, what change have we effected on the ground for those who need the change? In all of our different works, tensions, problems, and issues, and how we work together and whatever. That's the discipline. And I was just struck by one phrase from Margot Wallström, in which Mary lives in the way that she implements her standards and values and her challenges to all of us. But Margot Wallström said one phrase there this morning, which we should have as our guiding. Gender-based violence is not inevitable. Right? And that's where we start. We don't start from the fact it's terrible and it's a problem. It is not inevitable, and every step should come from there. And in 3 years' time, let's look at what we have done to make some women believe, not in words but in practice, that it's not inevitable.